Yeah, so I mean, obviously we just started recording, but if you don't want your face shown, obviously turn it off and we can edit that out. But let us know. Um, so yeah, thank you all for joining tonight. We're gathered today in our monthly Ontario call, which happens every Thursday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. And during these calls, we feature one of the members of our community or someone that we know who's doing really great work in Ontario to kind of tell us their story, tell us what they've done in terms of if it's an individual, tell us their history of organizing or their business or what have you. Or we also spotlight groups. And so sometimes if it's a group, then we spotlight the work that they've done, any sort of call to action that they might have. And then we just have a really nice, lively discussion afterwards. And so thank you all for joining this evening. My name is Hope. I am the Community Climate Hub's manager, and I am joined by Michelina, who's my colleague at Climate Reality as well. And we're joined by our lovely speaker, Janet, who will do a great job introducing herself in a second, and I can give a little bio. But before I do that, I just want to also acknowledge that we're joining from across Turtle Island. I know that most of us are in Ontario, but some of us are across the island. And so really important to just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territories that you're joining from. And so Michelina's put this great resource in the chat in case you don't know where you're joining from, for you to learn a little bit more about the traditional territories that you're occupying. Right now I'm joining from Tiohtià:ke, which is commonly known as Montreal, and I just invite everyone to kind of think about the relationship to the land that you might have, and encourage you to read any of your local treaties that you might be a part of, because in the end we are all treaty people. So yes, thank you for kind of holding that space for a second in your head. But yeah, I'm joined today by one of my other colleagues, Janet, who is going to be our guest tonight. And so Janet has been the regional organizer for the Southeastern Ontario region under the Community Climate Hubs program, which is the program I manage. And so I've gotten to know Janet over the last year and a half, and it's been a really it's been a joy and a pleasure to get to know her and get to work with her. And so I'm really excited to introduce you all to her, and excited for you all to learn a little bit more about her life story. So I'll pass it to Janet, and I will start sharing my screen with your slides whenever you say. So I'm here for when you need me.
Yeah, I would put it up, and then we'll be ready, set, go. Miigwech, thank you for being here, and between Climate Reality people and colleagues in the workplace, longtime friends, and a dear colleague that I've known around a year now, a little over a year, with Cultivating Safe Spaces. So, and our local Kingston hub. So that's Steve Lawrence. So he might be wondering, what is she going to say about me and her story? Yeah. Yeah. So if you can put it up, Hope, and then we'll begin.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah. So tonight, you're going to hear about living resistance and cultivating safe space and climate work. The basis to all of this is storytelling, and storytelling is not new to me, but telling my story is. And so it's part of my journey to reconciliation, and it is a key component of practice within my facilitator practice, is cultivating safe spaces. So what I've put together tonight is actually the first time. And of course, once I sent it over to Michelina and Hope, I went, oh, geez, I forgot this. But, I'll hopefully do it a second time around, and, we'll see. So let's go to the first page. Yeah, so the invitation to all of you tonight is to hear about my story as a lifelong environmental and climate activist through the tapestry threads of a book, an author, Caitlin Curtis, who wrote Living Resistance, an Indigenous Wisdom of Seeking Wholeness Every Day, and the book Calling My Spirit Back, which has led to an organization of facilitators that we cultivate safe space. And our elder, my teacher is Elaine Alec, and she is from the West. She is a Syilx and Secwepemc writer, and has formed a company to really support us and expose a way of cultivating safe spaces. And so, in addition to that, the second invitation is to take moments of personal reflection and see possibility in your own story. So tonight's just about me. Those of you who know me know that I might give some information and I say, and then how are you, how is it resonating with you? And today, November 16th, is I dedicate the presentation to the memory of my father, John Morenus, which is the 26th anniversary today of his unexpected death in the workplace. And so that's him with my mom in 1960, October 8th, when they got married. So I thought I'd bring his picture into the space tonight. And why I feel this is a particularly interesting time is that my father was very, his livelihood came from supporting the mining and metallurgy industry. And so you'll hear a little bit about that. And of course, as an environmentalist, I've had a lot of resistance in my later years to the practices that sector has had. Next slide. Yeah, so since 2021, so a little bit even before Hope, I have had two managers prior to her. I've been the regional organizer with Climate Reality Project Canada, the community hub, and I provide a sustaining presence. It's been 3 years now, and it's the first time in a long time that somebody in Southeastern Ontario has remained that long. And I support local community climate action, and these are the particular areas that we're focused on, but we're looking to expand in Peterborough, Kingston, Ottawa, and Lanark County. And we really pride ourselves on intergenerational exchange and collaboration. So who am I? I'm a daughter, a sister, a cousin, a friend, an aunt. I'm a mother of one who's now 38 years old. Oh, and I'm a grandmother of two, actually, not three. Somehow I've added one. Maybe that's an intention that they don't know about. I'll be updating that. A forager and an aficionado of locally produced food and baked goods, especially pies. So the markings in my life, my lineage from my father's side, his mother and father are of Slovak origin, a rural farming community. My mother came from Normandy, France, and my mother is from Britain, the Plantagenet royal family line, which is the rebel side of the family. And there's a lineage of strong women who really believed in social justice. I found out about 15 years ago that one of my ancestors was a journalist during the Boer War in South Africa, and she spent a lot of time there. So in terms of what, we're talking about today in terms of social justice, environment, and reconciliation, legacy was that I was baptized Catholic with much exposure to the Slovak Lutheran Church. I'm the daughter of a spiritual and religious mother, so I knew every religious holiday. And also some of the interesting sides, like on Fridays, sipping sherry with her mother. She had a commitment to church and community. I'm the daughter of a self-made man. He was a committed, hardworking person. My dad, John, he provided sales and support for the welding and mining industry, started in sales, which led to a co-owner of the Canadian branch of an American company. And that company still exists in the States, and it's this one. And we had lots of community engagement. So I grew up with enormous amount of community involvement, and it continues to today. Next step. So living resistance. My first point will be about curiosity. I remember when I was young and would spend hours on my back looking at the sky. I sensed the clouds and the wind, and I felt connection between my body and Mother Earth, and I would daydream. I still do it today underneath a tree where my cabin is out in Elfin. So I would, dreaming during the day or in the night is live and it breathes and it creates vision. It is a way forward that starts as a thread, sends pebbles for us to see, and weaves its way into our bodies, hearts, and minds. The path forward that we wander, and sooner or later we arrive at a place. So the first exercise that I'd like all of you to do is visualize a time when you were last in nature. It could be in a meadow, it could be beneath a tree, it could be water stream, another place, whatever it is for you. In Ottawa, like the Central Experimental Farm, the dog park. Is the spot a sunny spot or a shady place? Think of the history that has unfolded in that place over time. In this moment, what comes up for you? Just take a few notes. I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then if you wish, you can share in the chat. So 2 minutes. Another 15 seconds. Okay. So if you wish, you can share your what resonated with you in the chat, and hope we'll go on to the next page. So you're probably wondering, maybe wondering, how is daydreaming about connection with Mother Earth living resistance? It acknowledged the connections between all sentient beings, and then acknowledge my relationship to family, community, and the universe. What is beyond me? And then there's a choice, choosing to be in connection, and then more choice, choosing to continue, being open to what is next. Finding time with nature is actually soothing, and it's seeking healing time. In a world of pressure, time-based action, taking this time demonstrates living resistance. So curiosity has come to me about my place in this wider world, that ecosystem that we live in. How I see the world. I see I am but one amongst the sentient beings around me. 4 necessary conditions are required to cultivate safe spaces for more important discussions with others. The first is understanding self. So these 4 conditions you're going to see woven throughout the presentation, and maybe you'll have questions about this. So the first is understanding self. That's self-presence. That's the hard work. The second is working from a love-based place. And that's to see my goodness and embrace all that I am, including character defects. Patience is being calm and tolerant in face of differences and diversity. Discipline is building a practice and presence of paying attention. So in my role as a regional organizer for Southeastern Ontario, where I support and take time with local environmentalists, building local community hubs, means active learning and practicing these 4 conditions. So my early curiosity and purpose, you're going to see slides every now and then that's going to give kind of a history, high level. And if you have any questions about this, just write some notes down and you can ask me during the Q's and A's. So in 1968, something came to me about May 68 in Paris, and the student revolts that were happening there. And that has led to a thread of deep involvement with the student movement in Canada. 1970, I come from Montreal, the October crisis. In my little street, in a little town called Ville-la-Salle, in front of a factory which is no longer there, one day, all kinds of police and RCMP and all kinds of vehicles showed up, and a couple was taken away. And so that got me asking about what's happening actually in my province. What's the history here? And learnings about Quebec and nationalism. In 1973, it was the Greenpeace seal hunt campaign that really began my trajectory into the environmental side. And I knew the world was larger from where I was because I was given the opportunity to visit Slovakia, a very long trip back then. That was my father's side. And something woke me up in 1977 about choice, and I chose not to go to church anymore with the Catholic faith. 1978, I moved from Montreal to stay with family and go to university in Nova Scotia. So I began my trajet outside of the family unit. And I didn't just go to university. I sat down there and it was like, okay, I meet all the people. And the next thing you know, I'm quite involved with the local provincial and national union of students. And I was also a student journalist with Canadian University Press. Came back after 2 years and was a part-time student at Concordia, and continued though involvement, full-time involvement almost with the Quebec Student Association and the Canadian Federation of Students. So what I have realized is I am hardwired for justice. If you didn't see that thread, I'm providing it to you now. And I sense justice in my body. It's a checking sensation. So I'm curious how many of you may actually have that inside yourselves in terms of how you see the world when we have news that comes forward. So justice has driven my actions in solidarity work, which is grounded in the feelings of belonging and relationship to one another. And we call that kinship with Indigenous wisdom. And through solidarity work, we plant the seeds for reciprocity. As I connect to the goodness I see, I regenerate and in turn bring goodness back to the world. It has also driven my actions in protecting the land. And that's to reconnect to the land, to the work of kinship, being one in relationship to another sentient being. Colonized practices disconnect us from the land and our bodies. And protecting the land brings us back into relationship with Mother Earth. And that just doesn't regenerate the land, but it regenerates ourselves as well. So being in solidarity and protecting the land are elements of living resistance. And, I'm curious about, in your life, where you have been solidaire, as we would say en français, and how have you protected the land in your life up until now? Maybe just take a minute, Hope, before we change the page. Okay, next page. We're going to go through all those things in the chat later. So big markings. In 1981, I was 20 just turned 20, and my mother passes away from lung cancer. In 1982, in the social justice solidarity movement, there were a lot of demonstrations in Canada. It was the anti-cruise missile organizing based in Montreal, and I was the leader with the Alliance for Nonviolent Action. October that year, there was a week of resistance at the Ontario-based Lytton Systems, and there had been for approximately, I think, 3 years in a row. And I went from Montreal in a bus from Concordia, and I was one of 2 arrested for trespassing. So I spent 42 hours incarcerated before I was let go. So there are a couple of things here that will you can read if you're closer up. Just links about the actions from a long time ago. There is information available for the Alliance for Nonviolent Action, and it actually comes under Canadian Women Studies. And at the same time that we were doing nonviolent civil disobedience, there was a car bombing. How many of you have heard about the Lytton Systems bombing that took place in 1982? That year, there was hydro dams in BC that were bombed, and Lytton Systems happened. And at the same time, of course, those of us who were doing nonviolent civil disobedience had chosen the same place. And so some of my colleagues, my co-activists, were picked up for a while, but they were let go when they realized that they were not involved with the direct action group, who they found over time. And there's a lot of stories that you can read. So that was 1982. There's more to come as we come through the story. If you can go to the next. Yeah, so I got involved at university with the Quebec Public Interest Research Group. Have any of you been involved like with the Ontario Public Interest Research Groups or other public interest research groups? They're still around. Miklina, good for you. And in 1982 was the year that we saw some of the largest public demonstrations. Montreal, here in Ottawa, we had people coming in from all over the country. New York City had over 1 million people. So last year, the year before, there were articles written of why the spirit of June 12th, 1982 is really important to remember. And the frame for the demonstrations were anti-racism and anti-oppression, the system that we have. People that I work with included climate reality leaders that I found out about 3 years ago, like Normand Baudet. And we were all, and I think I have pictures back then, so I think I'll be sharing some of them, trying to get some of the old pictures over to him. There are a couple of really incredible films that came out. If You Love This Planet, that's a National Film Board film on Helen Caldicott, who's an Australian physician, and she's been an anti-nuclear activist and is still alive. And another one called 8 Minutes to Midnight. So these women, it was a woman who put If You Love This Planet together. There were a number of women who worked with her based in Montreal. Quite an exciting time. 3 years later, my son was born. Life changes a little bit, but he came out with me at every demonstration. I'd have him either on my chest or in his little carrosse in Montreal. And in 1986, life was changing a bit. I started to travel internationally with his father, and his first birthday was in Paris. 1992, we always compare the UN disarmament, environment, and development to June 3rd to 14th, UNCED, we call it, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. I had gone back to school to do my accounting degree, Bachelor of Commerce, and in 1992, in September, I basically organized a conference, Accounting for the Environment. I said, well, what are we doing in accounting? And caught up on a few people, and everybody who went either in Environment Canada or in our Quebec government to UNCED ended up in Concordia University for one day to talk about how we actually account for. And we're in 2023 today, and accounting standards are not yet set. They're just starting to come out. So think of the time it's taken from initial conversation to today. I graduated and came to Ottawa, and I was the first finance manager at the Environment and Development Support Program, which was with the Canadian Environmental Network. And 6 months later, I was with the Canadian International Development Agency, working on ENGO files, environment and geo files with the governance and financial risk unit. So I did that for about 10 years. And it was, contracting. So I was still involved locally, and I got involved with Friends of the Earth Canada. And in 1994, 95, we were programming on climate change. And we did all kinds of local activities here in Ottawa and, of course, globally. They were a leader in climate change programming with the David Suzuki Foundation that came a little bit later. 1997 is a remarkable time. I ended up in Nairobi at the Environmental Liaison Center International, doing some work with the locally engaged staff and the organization to really get it to have more engagement between expatriate staff and local people. And on my way back, that's when I learned my father passed away. So an in-between space. So you've heard about the first part of my life in terms of curiosity and social justice and justice. And now it's about liminality, that space in between. And it's a psychological process of transitioning across boundaries and borders. This is where we remember where we come from and learn about our ancestors. We understand and register who I am today. Who here has heard about each one of us who is here today is actually an ancestor in the making, right? And we look to future generations who will one day remember us, warts and all. So liminality is seeing the magic of who we already are and of who we are always becoming. It's conversations about identity and how we see the world. And it's also learning about how our bodies hold this space in between the past and the future, how we recognize the sensations of emotions and signs of stress and their effects. It's a very interesting place. So the space in between an effect on our bodies, I'm going to take you through moving by bicycle. So Steve, you're the cyclist. So we'll see what you have to say about this one. So resistance is resisting the momentum, is really thinking about and feeling how hard it is to pedal. The higher the resistance, the harder to pedal. Cadence is how fast or slow you are going on the bike. Too high is too hard, and you know what? You might burn out. Burn out, yes, actually, by moving on a bicycle. And think of how we live our lives. So, really, for a balanced life, it's to hit that sweet spot. So, living resistance is if we resist too hard and go too fast, we'll burn out. If we resist too hard and go too slowly, we may never get to where we need to be. And if we stop resisting and we stop moving, the journey's over. So we find that sweet spot, which is that space in between resistance and cadence where they meet. Just look that over just before we switch the page, just to kind of get it inside yourself, because the next page is a little exercise. So Steve has thumbs up. So yeah, in the Kingston Community Hub, they have done, and Steve himself is, and he can talk a little bit in the Q&A about, where cycling fits locally there and what they're learning. So let's go to the next page. Oh, it's the page after the, I wanted to give an example. No, just go back. Yeah. I wanted to give no, page before. Yeah. I wanted to give the example of how I've experienced that living my space in between. So I have all this kind of activism and not-for-profit and some work with CETA, but yet still focused on my environmental NGOs. And then I became a federal public servant to the year 2000. And I retired 2 years ago from the executive cadre at Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I had been there for, since 2010. So, 11, 12 years. And while I was in there, though, doing finance, corporate, Indigenous policy, I won a National Public Sector Team Award from CPA Canada in environmental accounting, contaminated sites. So I continued my focus of my attention in the environmental sector and the challenges. Things that I did between, 2000 and till the 2020 more or less is I had the opportunity to be involved with Haiti. I was a board member and actually had a mission trip there, and it was at the time when one of the uprisings occurred, and we were right in the middle of it all. During a week, it's something to remember for life. And for many years, for 3 years, I have really focused on food security and particularly organic food. Not just being a member of the Canadian Organic Growers, but was the lead for organizing harvest events called Feast of Fields. 2010, life changed a little bit, and I said, okay, all of this stuff going here and going there, I'm going to settle down a bit. And I have a cabin in Elphin, Ontario. So I'm part of a rural community network there, in addition to living in downtown Ottawa. And I joined the church. As you can recall, I left a church and I joined it there because it is the community hub. In 2015, I took an exploratory mission to Guatemala. Indigenous women were calling me, and spent 12 days in Guatemala with the church. I found the mission side of the church to be it's a place to call, but also a place for conversation and discussion. And that led the following year to being a participant in the first national church mission with residential school survivors here in Canada with the same church. It had been 20 years since the apology made of from the Presbyterian Church on their having involvement in leadership in residential schools. It took them 20 years to actually engage with the Indigenous people here in Canada, and that's part of that first mission. So that kind of launched my journey. So the exercise is reflect on a liminal space you have experienced or are experiencing in your life. What is your resistance level? What is your cadence level? And what is your next step knowing this? So I put the reminders about resistance and cadence. Resistance is resisting the momentum. It is hard, how hard it is to pedal. Higher the resistance, harder to pedal. And cadence is how fast or slow you are going on the bike. So too high, it's too hard, and you will burn out. So what is your resistance level? What is your cadence level? And what is your next step that you see? I'll give you like a minute. So welcome, Gina. We're going through exercises, and I'm very grateful you've been able to join.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late.
You are here. That's what counts. Thank you. You might want to just introduce yourself in the chat, Gina, which land you're on, where you're coming from. Okay, Hope, next one. So resistance and integration. Integral, for those of you who know me, it's very interesting that in the book, Living Resistance, there's a section on integral. And it means something that is necessary to make the whole complete. And seasonal cycles and circles in our lives have ways of signaling this to you. So integral space, it is an expansive space. It's where we imagine the four conditions that I mentioned earlier, where they all meet. We hold space to understand self. We work from a place of love-based practice. We practice patience with self and others, and we embody forms of discipline. Imagine that space. So integrating wisdom and continued practice, it gets closer to 2023 now. In 2017, I went into my coaching world and I became an integral associate level. That's the first of 3 levels as a coach. I received the distinction of, in my accounting side of my life, to be a fellow CPA and a fellow CMA, because my base is a certified management accountant. And I became a fellow CIPFA in the United Kingdom. In 2020, this is COVID time, I got aware of the Climate Coaching Alliance, and we formed the Climate Coaching Alliance in Canada, and I became co-convener, and I attained my Integral Professional Coach certification. And for the past 3 years, I've been having fun with the Integral community in Integral Europe. 2 years I was a virtual facilitator, and this year I went to Hungary. I was in person. 2021 is where you see that I've become the regional organizer of a community hub for the Climate Reality Project Canada. I've been a moderator with an organization called the Pachamama Alliance. It is based in California and is focused on the Indigenous people and in the Amazon and in Peru, and they do a lot of anti-racism and anti-oppression programming. And so I have been doing that 2 or 3 times per year, 9 weeks at a time. And I'm a facilitator of Circles of Reconciliation. '22, I woke up one day and it was there is grief and loss from a lot of things in this environmental world and in my own life that came from COVID surfaced. And I went off to search more about that, and I became a certified trauma-informed coach. I connected with my colleagues in the UK, and for the second time around now, I'm a coach with a peer coaching program, an environmental program called Sky Blue, and they have participants from all over the world as part of this program. I am a facilitator for Elaine Alec's organization, Cultivating Safe Spaces. She is my Indigenous teacher, and I'm a co-facilitator monthly with Climate Cafes with Carbon Conversations Toronto. This year has been a real body awakening trip. I went back to Slovakia 50 years after I had first been there, connecting with my dad's family and my ancestors. I am an ambassador for Canada for She Changes Climate and a mentor in that program. And as some of you know, I'm quite have an opposition to the local aggregate mineral quarry mining practices that we have now in Ontario that are taking over our land. And this initially, was causing a little bit of angst inside me because my father's livelihood was in mining and metallurgy in the sales side. But I know I have found that by going into this path and looking at what are the best practices, I can be in rampant opposition to the quarry mining and provide guidance. So resistance and integration. So we live our life and we say, what have we harvested to date? And it's where we gather the fruit of all we've worked hard for. So all the goodness, and we celebrate it. So tonight is actually a time for celebration. I am very grateful that, friends of mine and colleagues of mine, and both in, here with Climate Reality Project and in, my leadership area, and, friends are with me this evening, that you have wanted to hear my story and support me in my telling my story for the first time. But the realm of harvesting is also where we recognize and gather those bits and pieces, those fragments that hurt or are unresolved, and that we create grief spaces and we move towards healing. So at this point, it's take a moment and take a breath and celebrate who we are collectively tonight, but really who we are individually. The reconciliation begins with each and every one of us. There's the part on the outside, there's the part on the inside. And both parts are key to justice in climate work. I think it's last page. Oh, we have 2 pages. So the checkpoint, I'm bringing you back to 1982, 40 years ago. Remember those, the largest demonstrations for peace and disarmament in the history of our country and North America and around the world. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. And If You Love This Planet had an Academy Award, but the distributors were told you must register as foreign agents in the United States of America. And that movie, it was considered political propaganda. While that's going on, we had a peace camp on Parliament Hill. How many of you knew about that, and how many of you actually went to Parliament Hill in 1982? So 40 years ago, lots of openings, but lots of things that are like a little bit crazy. But we have had crazy things in our lives before, coming from initiatives, events that were public and citizen focused. So as a landing page, the lifelong work of resistance often feels like we are slamming our bodies, minds, and spirits up against barriers that will never come down. Every now and then, we get to the other side. We achieve what we were hoping to achieve. We protect water and lands from corporations. We experience real equity. We dismantle or change an unjust institution. Or we notice those in power finally releasing some control. But that is not often the case. Often we are struggling, hoping that someone else will come along and open that, excuse the language, damn door so we can be free. This is where we remember that the lifelong work of resistance will look different for each of us, but that same goal of love, justice, peace, and connectedness for all at the center. And that's my story. That is still continuing. That is still evolving. And I want to thank Geraldine, who is here tonight, for actually suggesting that book. She brought it forward for a book club with Cultivating Safe Spaces. And so now, Geraldine, you know I've read the book and I will be at the book club next time.
Well,
So
thank you
it's
so much. Oh, go ahead.
open for Q's and A's. Yep.
Yes, thank you so much, Dana, for sharing your story. It's I learned so much about you. I feel like I've known you for a while, but I've learned so much already, and it's very impressive, the life you've led so far. And please, anyone who has questions or kind of comments or anything that you want to dig deeper into, the floor is open.
So as I said, storytelling, right, is an, an art. Some people say it's a science, but it really is heart-based. So if you can just reflect upon what you've heard and, think of what came to my head. Where was my heart? What came to my heart? And, was my body receiving information? And is that something new for you? Is it something that has rekindled you this evening? Or is it something, I practice regularly and I hit all three centers of intelligence? Oh, Paula.
Yes, Paula, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It was incredible. I was awestruck, honestly. I just thought, wow, to have taken such a stance and being so selfless and involved in so many things. And I was just like, what have I done with my life? I felt like driven to do more, or to look and say, what can I do? And if I think that's incredible to just feel kind of, we're all in this together. I love the whole concept of justice. I feel strongly about justice as well. That really resonated with me. And, I thought, if all of us were doing a little bit more, what could we do? It could be enormous. And how do we get a fire lit under us? And I think this has kind of, been inspirational. So thank you.
So I would just like to recognize that I spent an hour this afternoon in a workshop Paula gave on the mystery of belonging. And she is one who has a following, because there are people, I have been trying to get to all her workshops, but there are certain people that raise their hand and said, I have been here before and I wait for your next session. So when we look at each of us, right, I'm telling you my story, but I invite you to maybe take this framework and look at your own life and write your own story. Because Paula, the subjects that you choose, belonging is a huge subject right now for all of us in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities. And you hit a lot of people with things that, they want to come back. So I recognize that in you and I appreciate you.
Thank you. I do feel it is a small way to give back at this point in my career, because I feel like, you know, you and I are, I think it's about the same age. And, you know, it's like we have some measure of wisdom now. So that is one way I have tried to give back a little bit, is with those free sessions. So thanks. And thank you for being there, because I need people like you to do the participation. So you knew I would speak tonight, right? You knew. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, Steve, the cyclist, maybe you can give a little introduction about who you are, what you do, and how this piece about, aligns with, or maybe gave you food for thought.
Yeah, I'm a cyclist, so I love any cycling metaphors, analogies, similes, you name it. So, and the cadence and the speed, and it was all very interesting. So yeah, as I say, we've had a good year at the Kingston Climate Hub, and we've started a couple of new events. And we're always, as we say, looking for new things to do. So we're happy to help with the national climate standings and various other events. And we're looking forward to working closely with you and Hope and Michelina to having a really good new year, basically. And then, as I say, Dan's really on board with this website. I defer to Dan and Hope a lot as the experts, and I'll be sort of the understudy, helping where I can. But I think we're looking forward to these projects this year. And as ever, we're so grateful for the great support we get from Climate Reality. It's been absolutely wonderful for us.
Well, we all look forward, right, to working together. So 3 or 4 of us here, including Michelina. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a great pleasure as always. And you have a fascinating story, and how nice of you to share it with all of us. And I certainly learned a few things, and thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. And so, I came here this evening and I said, okay, so I'm going to tell my story and it'll be recorded, which is good because then I can send it to my son, who tonight wanted to be here, and his partner, but they have parent-teacher interviews. I have a 5.5-year-old granddaughter who has those, they have those responsibilities. But at the same time, I said, well, who here might like to, start their story. And sometimes it's about having an initial, meetup. We certainly offer that, so that, you can start kind of, we can have conversation, you can have buddies, and, and we might have a number of environmentalists coming up. Hope, I think this year we have had 2 of us now who've given our story in Ontario. We had Victoria and myself. Next year, looking at, a couple more, including, and I would say including possibly some of our staff, maybe Hope or Michelina would love to tell their story, and we go on, right? And so if anybody's interested in that idea, I'd certainly, be willing to support that, and, might get some of my Cultivating Safe Spaces colleagues, my sisters, to support me as well. Yeah, so let's just look through some of the notes. Unless anybody else has something to share right now, we can just go through some of the chat notes. And
I can bring up one of the things that, oh, sorry, Lena, that I had kind of mentioned in the chat, just while you were speaking. I can't remember what slide it was on, but I didn't realize that you had gone to school in Nova Scotia, and I didn't know that you had been involved with the Canadian Federation of Students, because like that's part of my story, I suppose. So it's just interesting that we have that in common. I was pleased to hear that. I didn't know.
Yeah, I went to Mount St. Vincent University for 2 years, and the reason I chose that university is it was on Bedford Highway, maybe half a kilometer from where my aunt and my uncle lived. But I made that decision, and then they moved over to Dartmouth, and then I had to take the bus every day, which
That's
You
not
know,
a
and
easy
I
journey.
said, Dad, like I can't do this another year, and then I ended up in a little house down the road. Yeah, so I was the new students rep and took over external, the external VP, and then life began.
Oh, I was also external vice president in my students union, but it was King's, so it wasn't
Kings, yeah.
Mount St. Vincent. But Mount St. Vincent been to for a few conferences, including a CFS conference actually, and a CFS Nova Scotia at least. Really beautiful campus. Really, really lovely. Wow, we've got so
Yeah.
many East Coasters and connections to East Coast. Acadia is beautiful as well. Wow, look
Yeah,
at
so
this.
I started, before CFS was National Union of Students. And so the National Union of Students, moved into CFS, which is more service oriented. But the people that I was involved with have been very involved in either women's rights or union rights. Morna Ballantyne, she was the staff person with National Union of Students, and if you look up her name, I mean, she's been involved with all kinds of forward-thinking things. John Doherty, city councillor in Toronto. Jean Long was from Newfoundland and was involved with the city council there. Yeah. And one of my things I did, which I forgot to mention, was that my second year at the Mount was in public relations. And so there was a provincial election going on, and I volunteered and worked with Alexa McDonough. Like I had cookies in her kitchen. So all of those people that you meet wherever you are, right? Including us here today. Nicolina, any questions? Any other comments?
It wasn't a question, but I was just, again, like I said this in the chat as well, but I was just very impressed by all the organizing that you've done throughout your life. And I just think it was really cool. I knew you're from Montreal, but I didn't realize you're from LaSalle. And I have a couple of friends that grew up there, and they were telling me about like how polluted that area was like before. I think it's a little more gentrified now than it was. But it's just really interesting to like hear your perspective on it as well. So it's just very cool. So thank you so much for sharing. It was very insightful.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit of like speaking to that and speaking to what Paula's comment was actually, I think I always find it actually really great as like a younger person to hear about people's organizing stories and especially those who have like rich long histories of organizing. I think like sometimes I'm sure like Lena feels this too. Like I feel like, or at least I don't speak for Lena, but I'm sure I feel like as younger people, I feel like sometimes things can feel really hard and things can feel not obvious as to where we're working or like what we're working towards, or at least like sometimes the stamina is difficult to find. And so it's always really inspiring and really helpful to hear from people who have, sustained such a rich history of organizing and have like grown their stamina to continue working and to continue being so dedicated to justice and just the work and building community. I think it's always just really great to hear from seasoned pros, I guess.
This book, Living Resistance, with I started reading it, and then one thing that I found out, and I'll share with you, is that there is the section on integration where Elaine Alex conditions are mentioned. So my facilitation practice, and knowing Elaine, she was previously a contractor for me when I was an executive at Indigenous Services Canada, and following my retirement, she wrote her book. And then I found out about her facilitation organization, and I joined right away. So we've had this reciprocity in our relationship. But this book also brings reciprocity. It integrates the two within at the end. So, thinking of each one of our lives from beginning to end, whatever age you are, you don't have to be 62, which is my age, to be able to say, now I'm at integration. Wherever you are, you can meet integration. And then as you expand, right, how you live resistance, how you recognize that. Because sometimes we may not realize we're actually living resistance. We can be doing a leadership program, and the traditional frame is this way, but we bring in, new concepts. So in leadership, I always talk about vertical development and horizontal development. So vertical is as much as we can, as many things as we can get knowledge of. Horizontal development is as many things as we can get, knowledge of. And so we learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but the depth comes with the vertical side. So some people are specialized. They only know how a few things, and then they go possibly up the ladder. But what living resistance tells us is there's so much interrelationship. So it brings us to question, if you think you're specialized, are you really? Because you may have blind spots on many general areas that you have yet to touch. So the worldview we hold, right? What is that worldview? And how do we check in to check ourselves, right? To say, do I really see? Do I need other voices here in the room with me so I can, understand better and understand self better so that I can help others, especially in organizing, where we have all kinds of people, all kinds of ages, all different contexts. And some are very connected to the land, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that specifically reminds me of being in science versus being in humanities, and when you're in school, a lot of the times you have to take one humanities course if you're in science, or vice versa. But that definitely doesn't fulfill the quota just because you took one science class. You're not going to really understand the concept. And I feel like the two are so interrelated. At least for me, I did medical science in my undergrad, and then I decided to do a minor in dramatic arts. And just through that component of learning and drama, I feel like it opened up my mind to so much more and enriched my life in ways that I wouldn't have even known. So yeah, that's a really interesting concept, the up and out. So thanks for sharing that.
Horizontal development and vertical development.
Anyone else have any comments or thoughts or questions, reflections at all?
We don't have to stay till 8 o'clock if we don't have to. So I know she'll edit all this out. So
well, I'm sure that if anyone wants to get a hold of you, you can either reach out to Lena or me, or you can email Jenna directly. There's a more the regional organizer contact for Janet is janet@climatehub.ca. So yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about what the Climate Reality Project Canada does, and what either the Community Climate Hubs program does, or any sort of other training opportunities that might be under Lena's purview, then feel free to reach out and we can always let you know. Once again, we have these calls monthly, and so feel free to drop in at any call you'd like. They are happening every third Thursday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. You can find the registration link on our website, climatehub.ca/events. But we
next
usually
month, it's a seasonal one, I think, right?
yeah, it'll be a seasonal one, so it's always nice to be able to have a bit more of a reflective moment. I mean, we're already having a nice reflective moment now, but I guess it'll be more of a an invitation for everyone to reflect on the work that we've all done this year, and the wins, and just celebrate celebrate those wins, take some time for that, because I think, as I kind of mentioned before, this work is hard sometimes, and it's really important that we don't feel like we're just constantly moving uphill without at least being able to glance at the wins that we've had, and that the work that we've done that's been successful. So always good to celebrate it and keep it going. So, and have fun. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to, I always look forward to celebrations in December. I'm just going to read some of the takeaways from the first exercise, which was visualizing in nature. So Geraldine's not here, so I'll speak for her. But if you've written something here, I invite you to say what you've written. So sunny morning, this morning, a walk with a friend, newly fallen snow, glistening water, birds, trees, blue skies. Beside a highway, we see IKEA across the way. Noise from the highway distracts. What stories does this place have?
Yeah, I just I thought about the forest that I visited with my partner a couple months ago. I think it was in September, and I think it actually is an indigenous like forest reserve. I'm not sure the history because I'm pretty new to the province. I've only been in Quebec for a year, and I haven't really explored outside the island really that much at all because I don't have a car and it's kind of difficult. But just curious to know more about the history of the land there, and what took place in the past. So yeah.
And share about mine. I'm from Prince Edward Island. My happy place is the beach. And so that's what immediately came to my mind. And, at the beach, I go with friends and family. So I thought a connection, but really peace and tranquility, calmness, breathing, those kind of things. And then it shifted because the beaches were impacted last year by Fiona, the storm that down there, the significant hurricane that they had. So when I went down this summer, it was very different. And then I thought of change, regrowth, adaptation, and recovery and strength of the landscape as well. So that was part of that story. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but that was kind of a profound part of that, a shifting change in the landscape. And Prince Edward Island is very much under that siege, really. The coastlines are eroding, that kind of thing. So I'm really aware of that in my, place of birth. So that was my thought.
Yeah, I was a little jealous this summer when you told me you were there for like over a month or something. I went,
come visit Janet. Come stay with me at my cottage. You're welcome to come. I'm serious.
The red mud and the
Thank you.
potato chips are to die for.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and Hope, you talking about Lake Erie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what Paula said really resonated with me. I grew up on the North Shore of Lake Erie, and so I, year after year, became really familiar with the patterns of the lake. It's no ocean; it doesn't have tides, but it still has regular movements. And so, I was home in earlier this September, and usually in the fall, where the sun rises and sets, it's usually it changes because it kind of moves around like north facing or south facing. It kind of like does a little trajectory throughout the year, but during the fall it slowly starts to move back southwards, which means that it rises and sets over Lake Erie, which is really beautiful. And so I usually always get to see the morning sunrises and sunsets as the light grows dimmer, and it usually is windier too for some reason in the fall, so the waves are quite beautiful and they catch those beautiful low light. But I also have been noticing as the temperatures grow warmer, and as different things happen in the region, such as vast greenhouse development, and with that associated effluent and phosphorus disposals. The algae blooms have really been coming back. And this year it was really unseasonably warm in September. It felt like the middle of August still. And yeah, I could see algae blooms kind of start to form, and I hadn't seen those for a while. There was one summer when I was a kid that it was really, really bad. Like it was like green. But it hadn't been so bad for a while. But this year it was really obvious that the waters were warmer, and that things were worse. So that's been really interesting, and it's interesting to be like in my 20s now, having seen like 2 decades of change. And even though that doesn't sound like a lot to some people, it's like obviously more than ever for me. And I think about change a lot, especially when I go back to my hometown. I'm sure a lot of people feel like that, because it's something that you're able to really see differences more clearly than maybe like any other kind of more transient places that you're living. And especially because I come from a small town, so the change feels so much bigger in smaller towns. And so yeah, I feel like the lake is something that's really a nice symbol of both like consistency and groundedness, but also of the kind of slow changes that kind of can happen overnight as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I was reflecting on.
Well, right? You've been there. You're with it. You know when changes. We all know. Whether or not we allow it to just come up.
Yeah, and I feel like especially if you're not living in certain places anymore, when you go and kind of like time jump instead of just watching it consistently happen every single day, when you're kind of like only going so often each year, you're able to remark the differences maybe a little bit more than day to day. So
yeah, so the story that you're telling us over 20 years, right, in a video clip would be one of these past things that you see the beginning, you see the end, and you see it move very quickly, right, over 5 seconds or so, when it's a 20-year perspective. Yeah, it gives us room to wonder, right, those spaces that we know so well, that we can recall. That was part of the exercise this morning or earlier. Yeah, about thinking of visualizing, a nature place, but something that you might really know, that if you just call up, right, that's close to your heart. Wherever it is, right, in the world. We're in the nighttime now here, but it could be a morning space, it could be a midday space, it could be a midnight space.
well, I feel like you've all been watching the background of my room get darker and darker as the call has gone on. So I don't know if that's a good place to kind of call it for the night on those really nice, beautiful words of reflection. And yeah, may we all have moments of reflection throughout the day. And as the light, as the days grow shorter, I think that something I've been finding really nice about the darkness coming earlier, even though there's not as many good things about the darkness coming earlier. I found it has been it has been nice to be able to have more opportunity to kind of be inside and be a little bit more thoughtful. So I think let's go into the winter time. Let's go into this season with those kind of meditations in mind. And thank you, Janet, so much for leading those meditations of thought and of graciousness and justice. So, and
I'm very grateful for all of you and very appreciative for all of you who come. Thank you very much. And for your sharing.
Thank you.
Have a great
nice
night,
meeting everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Take care.
Thank you.